We can edit the beginning.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin. So if I may have your attention. My name is Gareth Bentley. I'm a teacher and a writer. I and we welcome you all very warmly to this very interesting and important event. I think you'll agree the weather feels good at the moment. Maybe we might want to double think that at the end of April. It feels so good. It's a humbling experience to introduce three outstanding activists, two to my right and one to my left, who have all made an extremely impressive track record of making our planet better for all animate beings. And they're just getting started. Lierre, Derrick Jensen, and Rupert Reed. In a few moments, Lierre will speak for 15 minutes, then Derrick for 30 minutes, then Derrick and Rupert for 15 minutes, and after this we'll open it for questions. I think you're familiar with that, right?
We'll make that up as we go along.
So, Lierre is an American writer, radical feminist and environmentalist. She's authored 7 books, including Bright Green Lies, How the Environment Movement Lost Its Way, and What We Can Do About It, and A Deep Green Resistance. She lives in Northern California with giant trees and giant dogs. Rupert Reed is a British philosopher, environmentalist, and founder of the Climate Majority Project. He's a recovering academic from UEA, that's the University of East Anglia. He's written at least 15 books on philosophy. His new book, Transformative Adaptation, Another World is Still Just Possible, was published last year, and it's over there. Some of his books are for sale, as you can see. He was a spokesperson and political strategist for Extinction Rebellion. Derrick Jensen is an American eco-philosopher, poet, writer, and environmentalist. He has written at least 30 books, and he's not stopping. His work has touched many people across the world and growing. He is one of the most important living voices speaking about the end game of civilization, and even more importantly, speaking for nature herself. Just a couple of preliminary thoughts before I get out of the way. How can it be that planetary ecocide is the single most important issue facing the world, with all species at risk, and drilling licenses continue? How can it be that all non-human earthly beings, Palestinian human beings and indigenous human beings, face unbearable suffering, which we're all very deeply worried about, and absolutely nothing stops the arming of the culture responsible? Rhetorical urgency and policy-making impotence are not enough. In 1982, there was a UN General Assembly declaration called the World Charter for Nature, and I quote, "Mankind is part of nature, and life depends on the uninterrupted functioning of natural systems. Every form of life is unique." This was the first historic, non-anthropocentric declaration embodying the inalienable rights of all earthly life forms. And just before I hand over to Lierre, a beautiful quotation from Derrick's book, Walking on Water, from 2004. "I hate industrial culture for what it does to the planet, for what it does to communities, and for what it does to individual non-humans and humans. Because it forces them to sell their lives doing things they do not love, and because it rewards people for harming each other and destroying their land bases. I hate industrial schooling because it commits one of the few unforgivable sins there are. It leads people away from themselves, training them to be workers and convincing them it's in their best interest to be ever more loyal slaves, rowing the galley, that is industrial civilization, ever more fervently to hell, compelling them to take everyone and everything they encounter down with them.
Thank you. Every living creature is in peril. I know it's unbearable. Reality is an avalanche of grief right now. But I'm asking each of you to take your heart out of cold storage. You put it there for safekeeping, I know. But there is no safety on a planet being murdered. We're going to back up 2.3 million years. The genus Homo arrives on the plains of Africa, and that's us. Homo sapiens appears 400,000 years ago, and by 200,000 years ago, they're identical to modern humans. By 100,000 years ago, we're burying our dead. The bodies are positioned, they're painted, they've got grave goods. By 50,000 years ago, we have modern human culture. People are making clothes, jewelry, musical instruments. There's barter, and there's art. We're painting a lot of animals. This is the second most common art project. This goddess is the oldest piece of figurative sculpture ever found. So the first art we ever made was of the megafauna and the megafemales, because that was who gave us life. The first thing we did with our human consciousness was say thank you. And for all that time, for 2.5 million years, we were not monsters and destroyers. We were participants. If the whole length of that field is our time on Earth, the last half a yard represents the time we've been doing agriculture. The last 1/5 of an inch represents the Industrial Revolution. So half a yard is where the disaster begins. In maybe 14 places around the world, people completely change their way of life with this activity called agriculture. In very brute terms, you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it to human use. Agriculture is biotic cleansing. This is Iraq, one of the places agriculture started. No one in their right mind would call this place the Fertile Crescent now. This is Iran. This is inevitable. This isn't agriculture on a bad day. This is what agriculture is. And that's not a mountain in the background. That's dust. That was soil. You pull down the forest, you rip up the prairie, you drain the wetland, you exsanguinate the world of water and soil and species and the process of life itself, until all that's left is dust. Now, in all the places that agriculture started, human society follows the same pattern. It's called civilization. Now, that word, civilization, it just means people living in cities. What that actually means, though, is they need more than the land can give. So food, water, energy have to come from somewhere else. From that point forward, it doesn't matter what lovely, peaceful, nonviolent values people might hold in their hearts. That society is dependent on imperialism and genocide, because no one willingly gives up their land, their water, their soil, their trees. But since the city has used up its own, it has to go out and get those from somewhere else. So that's the last 10,000 years in 8 sentences. So the central concept here is drawdown. If you use more wood than a forest can grow, eventually the forest will be gone. If you take fish faster than they can reproduce, one day the river will be nothing but water and sorrow. And then there are things that don't reproduce. Using them at all means using them up. You can blow up mountains to get to the last of it, but now you're drawing down mountains as well as coal. At the end of the day, it's still gone. This is simple arithmetic. It's if you have one planet, so one blanket of air, one cradle of soil, one place called home, and you destroyed it, it's 1 minus 1. And that is the pattern of civilization, over and over. There's a bloated power center surrounded by conquered colonies from which the center extracts what it wants, until eventually it collapses. That collapse takes between 800 and maybe 2,000 years until the soil gives out. Agricultural societies end up militarized for 3 reasons. 1, agriculture creates that surplus. If it can be stored, it can be stolen. So it needs to be protected. 2 is imperialism. Agriculture is a war against the natural world. Eventually, the agriculturalists need more of everything. So there's an entire class of people whose job is war, whose job is to take land by force. Agriculture makes that possible, it also makes it inevitable. And number 3 is slavery. Agriculture's backbreaking labor. By the year 1800, when the fossil fuel age began, fully 3/4 of the people on this planet were living in conditions of either slavery, serfdom, or indenture. 3/4. Once you have huge numbers of the population in slavery, you need someone to keep them there. So this is the cycle we've been on for 10,000 years. Once upon a time, there were untold numbers of tarpons, and oryx, and ibex that roamed this continent. There were wolves, and lions, and bears. For 50,000 years, we said thank you. We knew to say thank you. Now, only one major river is left free-flowing in Western Europe, and only one population of sturgeon still exists. Once, when the sturgeon returned to spawn, you could hear the fish coming for an entire day. You could hear them coming. No one in this room has heard the sound that water makes when 40 million years of persistence makes its way home. This is who else may be taken from you here in this place. The red squirrel, the turtle dove, the Scottish water cat, and the water vole. That's Ratty for wind and willows, the water vole. There are lists of the damned. You will need your hearts to face this. I know what I'm asking, but better a broken heart than no heart at all, because even a broken heart is still made of love. And here we are at the end of the world, 1 minus 1. 98% of the old-growth forests and 99% of the world's prairies are gone. There's nothing left to take. Civilization consumes the culture as well. So the very creation myth of Western civilization tells men to dominate, to conquer, to go forth and multiply. No hunter-gatherer is told by God to willfully overshoot the land's carrying capacity, and no marginally rational person would listen to such a God. The founding myth also condemns women to sexual subordination. Why is not a mystery. Patriarchy becomes a primary feature of civilization because its scarcity of land, of labor, of food drives the concept of private property. Matrifocal cultures have little investment in paternity. The central social unit is mother-child, not man-wife, and a woman's brothers, not her sexual partners, are the men who help provide for children. With private property comes inheritance and the need to establish male heirs. The valuing of paternity makes male violence inevitable. The only way a man can be sure of his offspring is through total control of a woman's body. Across history, men have devised a range of constraints, including lifelong tortures, foot binding, female genital mutilation, to ensure that male children are indeed their sons. So meaning was drained from the living world and placed above in an angry sky father who reigns rather than participates, punishes instead of heals. Even still, the image of the earth as a living body persisted in the West until the co-joined scientific and commercial revolutions. That image was replaced with a mechanistic framework in which nature is dead and passive, existing to be controlled by men. These are torture implements for the earth. These new technologies would be powered by fossil fuels, and with essentially unlimited power, there would be no limits to the destruction. The concept of a living planet would finally be severed on the dissection slab of mechanistic science. Francis Bacon is a founder of the scientific revolution. He argued that man may be regarded as the center of the world, for the whole world works together in the service of man. He bluntly stated the goal, such a deep understanding of nature's secrets that men's power over her would be practically unlimited. Well, Bacon's vision is now here. Industrial technology has emptied rivers, crushed mountains, damaged the climate itself. Its power only limited because the planet has in fact turned out to be finite. It's created a world entirely of objects, mechanical instead of living, manufactured, not born, which Gerrymander named the technosphere. And it's been measured. The technosphere weighs 7 times more than the current mass of all living creatures. The critics become Cassandras. No one is listening. Lewis Mumford saw that the culture is, quote, in the grip of an irrational compulsion. Well, it is irrational to believe the life from the only planet that you've got, but the compulsion has an inner coherence. The predictable consequences of the psychology required by the soldier rapists of patriarchy. Their masculinity is constructed on what sociologists call a negative reference group. Quote, a group rejected by one's own group. It is the enemy. It's the thing you don't want to be. For boys in patriarchy, that first despised other is, of course, girls. The first rule of masculinity, wrote Andrew Dworkin, is whatever he is, women are not. Once the psychological process is in place, the category female can be filled with any group that a hierarchical society needs subordinated. That need is endless when the culture is using up trees, soil, species, and slaves. But it's also endless when men's psychology is based on sadism. Psychiatrist Erich Fromm defines sadism as the passion to have absolute and unrestricted control over a living being. Or, as Derrick Jensen describes with spare eloquence, for men in patriarchy, everything is violable and everything must be violated. A personality with an endless drive to prove itself against another, any other, creates a violation imperative. Men become real men by breaking boundaries. The sexual boundaries of women, the political boundaries of other people, the biological boundaries of living communities, the genetic boundaries of species, and the physical boundaries of the atom itself. But the sadist is never satiated. There's always another self-willed creature who must be broken. The power of sex is ultimately defined as the power of conquest, wrote Andrew Dworkin, who well know. Male supremacy eroticizes domination and subordination, inscribing synapses of sadism into the brain. Anything tied to sexual response lights up the limbic system, a part of the brain so ancient it's found in all vertebrates. It also shuts down parts of the prefrontal cortex, which is what heroin does. A surge of dopamine and endorphins produce euphoria. Every area of the brain involved in sex is activated maximally. There's no stronger endogenous stimuli. That potent ecstasy should create deep and abiding intimacy. The process is there, built into us, body and brain, waiting to flower. But that process has been hijacked, not just by patriarchy, but now by the pornography industry. The scale of the takeover is nearly inconceivable. Pornography sites get more traffic than Amazon, Netflix, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and LinkedIn combined. In 2019, uploads to Pornhub came to 12,500 gigabytes per minute. That's enough content to fill the memory of every single cell phone on the planet, every minute. This vicious industry is rewriting our collective sexual script by fusing sex with hatred and humiliation. So there's this surge in the so-called rough sex defense. To put it bluntly, men are strangling women to death for sexual pleasure and getting away with it. The generative impulse of our species, biologically rich with exquisite nerves and alchemical joy, has been transmuted into necrophilia. In the subordination of women, inequality itself is sexualized, made into the experience of sexual pleasure, essential to sexual desire, wrote Andrea. This is both the core of patriarchy and its brilliance. The brilliance of feminism is that we figured that out. Women took the tools of political analysis learned on the left and applied them to our own lives. Teach slaves to read, and eventually they write their own political theory. Eventually, they also revolt. The worst subordination women experience is in the realm called private, done by men who claim to love us through actions they experience as sex. So we started counting. The numbers are a trauma on their own. In the US, a man beats up a woman every 9 seconds. 1/3 of battering starts when a woman is pregnant, and male violence, a willful fist or foot, is the #1 cause of birth defects. 80,000 American children are sexually abused every year. One by one, these men do this to the most vulnerable. Children are so easy to control and even easier to hurt. The small bones break, the fragile tissues tear, the fledgling self splinters from its only body. 80,000 times the world should stop spinning, and it doesn't, and I don't know why. Globally, well, this is why we call it a war. If these numbers aren't just background noise, the inevitable, unremarkable actions of everyday men taking what is theirs, but actual crimes done to human beings. If women are political subjects with inalienable rights, there is a word for harm at this scale. War fits, but men scoff when we say it. Fine, but I would like to know what else to call it. What feminists see is that the war against women and the war against the earth have not just the same driver, but the same endpoint: necrophilia. 2 centuries ago, a teenage Mary Shelley left us Frankenstein as a warning. A young scientist has, quote, "one thought, one conception, one purpose: to conquer life." He has the generative capacity given to all living creatures, but he doesn't want to be a participant. He wants what science is seeking, quote, "immortality and power." He knows that boundary breaking is required. Quote, "life and death appear to me ideal bonds which I should first break through." The necrophilia is stark. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? He collapses after his success, falling into a nightmare vision of his dead mother. The mother, the source of life, is a corpse in this new world made by men. As the living world has been turned into the technosphere, so the human body is under the same assault. This is the reign of the image. We no longer are our bodies with their animal integrity, but wardens in a pornopticon, watching ourselves watch ourselves. To be seen is to be disciplined, but to be invisible is to die. The young are especially being destroyed by the impossibility of this experience, girls most of all. Teen porn is, of course, one of the most common internet search terms globally, and girls have to live in the same world, both online and off, as the men who type it. And transgender ideology is now driving a narrative of disembodiment and dismemberment with the medical procedures to match. Our bodies are now things we have, things made up of other things, collections of replaceable parts. Breasts, vaginas, and penises can be bought, as can puberty, or so claim the modern-day Dr. Frankensteins. In reality, the sexed body, like the prairies and the forests, like the planet itself, is a living process with its own self-willed integrity. The effects of puberty-blocking drugs are catastrophic. Perfectly healthy children are being permanently sterilized. This is a movement arguing for the destruction of the generative organs of children. I have no other word for this but necrophilia. The essential disembodiment of the internet is the dream of the necrophiliac, obsessed as they are with robots and machines. There are now men who want us to upload ourselves into the internet. Tech-millionaire Martin Rupert is one of them. He also declares that he's a woman. In reality, the name for his condition is autogynephilia, which is a sexual fetish. Men who are aroused by imagining that they are women. Rothblatt argues that anything belonging to women, from words for our bodies to separate spaces for our safety, is a form of, quote, apartheid. So egregious is the harm to men like him. His life goal is to, quote, tear down walls and barriers that exist between the digital world and biological existence, and doing so with the creation of a new species of robot. Note that he made a robot to replicate his wife and gave it her name. This is where the Stepford Wives meets Silence of the Lambs. He also started a religion, it's called Terrasim. He outlines how nanobots will replace all human life. Humans, all life across the universe. Humans will upload themselves into computers to live forever, and technology will take over the cosmos, becoming omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. He says point blank that he is creating God. At least Victor Frankenstein was content to create a humanoid. Rothblatt intends to do away with biology entirely. This is narcissistic rage, driving the disordered to his predictable endpoint, necrophilia. Enraged that he can never be a woman, he would destroy all life in revenge. And so the technosphere will end at the necrosphere. This is what feminists know. The male erotic trinity, sex, violence, and death, reigns supreme. Andrea tried to show the world what she had learned through the childhood molestation, the battery, and then all the rapes. Men tell us who they are, believe them. When bison are under attack, they pack into a tight circle, protected at the center of the mothers and babies. Next are the older calves, weaned and vulnerable. A defensive ring of cows without young comes next. And finally, facing out, stand the bulls. We are under attack. Every living creature is under threat. He has leveled mountains, believe him. But if we all make that tight circle, mothers and babies of every species at the center, protected until the last, and plant our feet firmly on our still living earth, we can face him down. He has the rancid thrills of sadism and the sterile dreams of machines. We have love, and the miracle of our animal bodies, and the stalwart light of every dawn. Don't let him win.
I have done this before, and I don't know why I bothered to give a talk after Lierre. I actually can't really listen to a lot of the talk because the entire time she's saying stuff, I'm going, okay, cut that paragraph, cut this one. Oh, she said that way better. I have to tell you one story. When we wrote the book Deep Green Resistance, I wrote the introduction, and then she edited it. And when she edited it, she changed some stuff. And over the years, I've gotten probably 15 notes from people who say, "God, Derrick, I love your writing so much, but there's one line I especially love. It's the best line you've ever written." Which is...
Well, it's at the top.
Yeah, I know.
Better broken heart than no heart at all.
No, it's not that one.
Because even broken heart is still made of blood.
Yeah, it's like, God, that's the best line you ever wrote, Derrick. I always say thanks. Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? No, I always say thank you for saying that, and God damn it, it's not my fucking line. And I'll cut this one. Anyway, it was great. Can you hear, what do I do with this?
You have to do it very close.
Big close to you.
Okay. It is you already gave my talk. Yeah, just go ahead and hold it, and I'm trying to get the talk too. Anyway, it's great. It is fashionable these days to start one's talk with an acknowledgement of whose land we're on. But in every case, these acknowledgements, which would be really weird here in Britain, because like, is Britain land in Anglo-Saxon, actually Danish, actually, how far back do you want to go?
Long way.
Yeah, but if we go back far enough, actually, in every case, these land acknowledgements ignore the land, those whose land it really is. And so for here, that would of course be the gray wolf and the brown bear, the great auk and the ghost orchid, the large copper butterfly and the common tree frog. All of whom are no longer here. So as a longtime grassroots environmental activist, and as a creature living in the thrashing endgame of civilization, I'm intimately acquainted with the landscape of loss, and I've grown accustomed to carrying the daily weight of despair. I walk clear cuts that wrap around mountains and drop into valleys, and climb ridges to fragment watershed after watershed, and I've sat silent by near empty streams that 2 generations ago were lashed into whiteness by uncountable salmon coming home to spawn and die. I began to feel pretty apocalyptic, but I hesitated to use that word, in part because of those drawings I've seen of crazy penitents carrying the end is near signs, and in part because of the power of the word itself, apocalypse. Didn't want to use that lightly. And then a friend and fellow activist said, "So Derrick, what's it going to take for you to finally use that word? Death of the salmon? The elimination of flocks of passenger pigeons so large they darken the sky for days at a time, flying 100 kilometers an hour and sounding like rolling thunder? The killing of the great herds of bison? How about the end of the great coral reefs? The extirpation of 200 species per day? 400? 600? Give me a specific threshold, Derrick. A specific point at which you'll finally use that word." Do you believe that our culture will undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living?
No.
For decades, I've asked people that question at talks and rallies, and libraries, on buses, and airplanes, and grocery and hardware stores, everywhere. And the answers range from emphatic no's to laughter. Nobody answers yes. One guy at a talk, he raised his hand, and when everybody looked at him, he dropped his hand and said, "Oh, voluntary. No, of course not." And we will have a change to a sane and sustainable way of living by definition, or we won't be living at all. And every cell in my body wants for that to be voluntary, but we all know it won't be. So the next question, for those of us who care about wild nature, how would this understanding that this culture won't voluntarily stop destroying the natural world shift our strategy and our tactics? The answer is nobody knows, because we don't talk about it, because we're all so busy pretending we have hope. I became an environmentalist when I was 7. They put in a subdivision next to where I lived, and they converted all the meadows into roads, lawns, and white box houses. I remember thinking, even as a kid, that they can't keep doing this forever. If they keep doing this, where will the meadowlarks go? Where will the garter snakes go? Where will the cottonwoods go? I didn't have this language, but I understood at 7 that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. They say one sign of intelligence is the ability to recognize patterns. So I'm allowed a pattern. Let's see if we can recognize it in less than 6,000 years. When you think of Iraq, is the first thing you think of cedar forest so thick that sunlight never touches the ground? One of the first written myths of this culture is Gilgamesh deforesting the hills and valleys of Iraq to build a great city. The Arabian Peninsula was oak savanna. Those trees were cut for export. The Near East was heavily forested. We've all heard of the cedars of Lebanon. They still have them on their flags. Greece was heavily forested. Plato, and the other two, complained that deforestation was harming water quality. I'm sure the ancient Greek Department of Forestry told them they had to study this for a few years to make sure there's really a correlation. North Africa. North Africa was heavily forested. These forests were cut to make the Egyptian and Phoenician navies. Forests precede us, and deserts dog our heels. Which is, I think, the best line I've written that I actually wrote. When I was a baby activist in my 20s and 30s, I noticed a disjuncture between private and public discourse. In private, the activists I knew said they were hanging on by their fingernails, doing whatever they could to protect this or that piece of ground, this or that species, until civilization collapsed, when wild nature would at least have a chance of recovering. But they said that only in private. In public, they said, "Oh, we just want to stop this one particular timber sale, stop this one particular destructive activity." For fear of losing credibility, they couldn't say in public that civilization itself functionally destroys land bases. That's what it does. And this makes our discourse really dysfunctional and dishonest, crazy-making, and ineffective. When people ask, for example, how can we save the salmon? What they're really asking is, how can we save salmon without stopping industrial logging, stopping industrial fishing, removing dams, stopping the murder of the oceans, and stopping global warming? And the answer is you can't. We could do this exercise for species after species. Or let's talk about global warming. What do all the so-called solutions to global warming have in common? They all take industrial civilization as a given, and the natural world is having to conform to civilization. According to so-called solutions, this way of life cannot be questioned, and its demands for growth, for raw materials, for energy, for space are not negotiable. Nature must always be the one to compromise. Civilization, or the economy, is always the independent variable, and nature is the dependent variable. But they are solving for the wrong variable. This is literally insane in terms of being out of touch with physical reality. Wild nature, physical reality, must always be the independent variable, and any economic system you have must be the